In the heart of a raging snowstorm, a helpless white tiger cub stumbled through the icy wilderness, the sapphire blue eyes filled with desperation. Little did Keanu Reeves know, this tiny creature was about to change his life forever, leading him into a deadly fight against nature, poachers, and his own limits to save a mother tiger trapped in an unyielding iron snare. The snowstorm roared across the Himalayan mountains. Fierce and unrelenting, the wind howled like a living beast, whipping up flurries of snow that swallowed everything in sight. Keanu Reeves trudged carefully through the snow-covered wilderness, each step deliberate and slow. His breath came out in white clouds, and the biting cold seemed to creep through every layer of clothing he wore. He hadn't come here to face a storm like this. The Himalayas were meant to be a retreat, a place where he could escape the chaos of Hollywood and the relentless demands of fame. But now, far from the serenity he'd hoped for, he found himself battling a storm that threatened to strip away even the smallest sense of peace. Suddenly, a sound pierced through the relentless wind, a high-pitched cry, faint but unmistakable. Keanu stopped in his tracks, his heart pounding. He turned his head, straining to hear it again. It was distant, almost swallowed by the storm, but it was there, a desperate, helpless sound. Was it an animal? A person lost in the storm? Another cry came, closer this time. It was unmistakably a call for help. Without hesitation, Keanu turned toward the sound, his instincts urging him to act. His legs burned with effort as he pushed through the deep snow, the cry guiding him like a beacon. And then, he saw it. First, he thought it was a trick of the storm, a pale blur against the endless white. But as he drew closer, he realized it was a small, white tiger cub, its sapphire blue eyes locked onto him, wide with fear but also filled with something else. A desperate plea. The tiny creature was trembling, its frail body barely standing against the storm. "Hey, little one," Keanu murmured softly, crouching to make himself less intimidating. His voice was calm, gentle, trying to reassure the frightened cub. "What are you doing out here? Where's your mom?" The cub didn't move away. Instead, it let out another weak cry and turned its head, looking back toward the thick forest behind it. Then it glanced back at Keanu, as if trying to tell him something, took a step forward, turned again, and cried out once more. "You want me to follow you?" Keanu asked, more to himself than the cub. It was absurd to think that a wild animal could be asking for his help. But something about the cub's behavior made him believe it. Without another thought, Keanu adjusted his pack and followed. The forest was dense, the trees weighed down by layers of heavy snow. The storm howled through the branches, snapping twigs and scattering ice. The cub moved as quickly as it could, stumbling now and then but always pressing forward. Keanu followed closely, his boots crunching against the snow. When they reached a clearing, Keanu stopped in his tracks. His breath caught in his throat as he took in the sight before him. Lying in the snow was a magnificent white tiger, larger than any he had ever imagined. Its fur, once pristine, was now stained with blood, and its hind leg was trapped in the cruel jaws of a steel snare. The trap had bitten deep into its flesh, leaving raw, red wounds that bled onto the snow. The tiger's breathing was labored, each breath a visible cloud of pain. The cub ran to its mother, nuzzling against her side and letting out a series of soft, plaintive cries. The mother tiger lifted her head weakly, her golden eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and fear. Keanu felt his chest tighten. This wasn't just nature's cruelty. This was man's doing. The trap was a poacher's snare, designed to capture and kill majestic creatures like this for profit. Anger flickered inside him, but he quickly pushed it aside. There was no time for rage, only action. "It's okay," Keanu said softly, taking a step closer. He kept his movements slow, careful not to startle the injured animal. "I'm here to help, I promise." The tiger growled weakly, her body tensing as he approached. Keanu stopped and knelt in the snow, giving her space. He studied the snare closely. It was rusted but still strong, his jagged teeth digging deep into her leg. It wasn't going to be easy to remove, especially in the middle of a storm, but leaving her here wasn't an option. Reaching into his pack, Keanu pulled out a multi-tool. He took a deep breath, steadying his hands as the wind howled around him. "All right, girl," he murmured, his voice steady and calm. "This might hurt, but I'll be as gentle as I can." The tiger let out a low rumble, her eyes watching him intently. Keanu began working on the snare, carefully loosening the rusted metal. Every twist and pull sent fresh pain shooting through the tiger's leg, and she let out low, guttural growls that made the cub cower beside her. Keanu spoke softly, both to the tiger and to himself. "Almost there, just a little longer." Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The storm raged on, snow piling up around them, but Keanu didn't stop. His fingers were numb, and his body shook from the cold, but he refused to give up. Finally, with a loud snap, the snare gave way. The tiger let out a roar, a mix of pain and relief. As her leg was freed, Keanu quickly backed away, giving her space to recover. She collapsed onto the snow, her breathing ragged but her body visibly relaxing. But Keanu knew the danger wasn't over. The tiger was injured, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. If they stayed out here, she wouldn't survive the night, and neither would the cub. "You're going to need help," Keanu said, shrugging off his heavy coat. He draped it gently over the tiger's body, offering her a bit of warmth. Then he looked at the cub, who was staring up at him with those impossibly blue eyes. "Don't worry, little one. I've got you both." He glanced around the forest, his mind racing. They needed shelter, and fast, with the storm intensifying and time running out. Keanu knew this was only the beginning of their fight for survival. Keanu's breath came out in shallow puffs as he pushed through the worsening storm, guiding the injured tiger and her cub toward what he hoped was safety. Every step felt heavier, the snow pulling at his legs like quicksand. The tiger mother limped alongside him, her strength fading, while the cub stayed close, its tiny frame shivering against the relentless wind. Keanu glanced back at them both, his heart tightening. They were fighting for their lives, and he couldn't let them down. Through the swirling snow, Keanu's sharp eyes caught a dark outline ahead, rocks, jagged and half-buried under the white blanket of the storm. As they drew closer, he spotted an opening, a shallow cave tucked into the side of the mountain. It wasn't much, but it was shelter, and right now, that was all they needed. "This way," he called softly, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. The tiger mother hesitated, her golden eyes wary, but Keanu's calm presence seemed to reassure her. She followed, her cub scurrying close to her side. Inside, the cave was cold but mercifully dry, its walls offering a reprieve from the storm's fury. Keanu set down his pack and immediately went to work. He scraped together a pile of dry twigs and leaves he'd collected earlier, striking his lighter until a small flame flickered to life. The fire grew, casting a warm glow over the cramped space. The tiger mother lay down with a low groan, her cub curling up against her side. Keanu crouched near them, holding his hands over the fire to thaw his frozen fingers. It was in that moment, watching the tiger and her cub huddle together, that Keanu felt a strange but undeniable connection. This wasn't just about survival, it was about trust. Against all odds, these creatures had chosen to trust him, and that trust was something he could never betray. Before we dive further into this incredible story, I want to take a moment to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. I'd love to see how far this story travels. And if you've ever felt a connection with an animal that's changed your life, hit that like button. Because as you'll see, this story isn't just about survival. It's about the miracles that can happen when we bridge the gap between humans and nature. Keanu rummaged through his pack, pulling out a small first aid kit. The tiger mother's leg was in bad shape. The steel trap had left deep wounds that oozed blood. An infection was a real risk. He tore strips of fabric from his own shirt, improvising bandages. The tiger growled softly as he cleaned the wound, her body tensing with every touch. Keanu murmured words of reassurance, his voice steady and low, like a lullaby in the storm. "You're a fighter," he said, tying off the last bandage. "We'll get through this. I promise." The cub watched him intently, its wide eyes full of curiosity and fear. It took a hesitant step toward him, then another. Finally, it reached out with a tiny paw, tapping his knee as if to say thank you. Keanu couldn't help but smile. "You're a brave little one, aren't you?" The hours passed slowly, the storm showing no signs of relenting. Keanu stayed awake, feeding the fire and keeping an ear out for danger. His mind wandered to the poachers who had set the trap. Were they still nearby, scouring the forest for their prize? The thought sent a chill down his spine, colder than the wind outside. He knew they couldn't stay in the cave for long. As soon as the storm let up, they'd have to move. But the question lingered, where could they go? The tiger mother couldn't travel far in her condition, and the cub was too young to fend for itself. Keanu thought of the wildlife sanctuary he'd read about before starting his retreat. It was a day's journey from here, maybe more in these conditions, but it was their best chance. He just had to get them there before the poachers found them, or before the wilderness claimed them. As dawn broke, the storm began to ease. The wind calmed, and the snow fell in soft flakes instead of violent gusts. Keanu packed up his gear and coaxed the tiger mother to her feet. She rose slowly, favoring her injured leg, but her spirit was unbroken. The cub nuzzled against her, then trotted over to Keanu as if to urge him onward. "All right," he said, glancing at the pale sky. "Let's get moving." The trek was grueling. The snow was still deep, and the air was bitterly cold. Keanu led the way, stopping often to let the tiger mother rest. At one point, they reached a frozen river, the surface glinting like glass. Keanu tested the ice cautiously, his boots creaking against the brittle surface. He signaled for the tiger and her cub to follow, but halfway across, the ice cracked beneath their weight. Keanu shouted, his voice sharp with panic, as the tiger mother slipped, her injured leg giving out. The cub cried out, scrambling to reach her, but the ice gave way beneath them. Keanu lunged forward, grabbing the cub by the scruff just as its tiny body plunged into the icy water. He hauled it to safety, his heart pounding as he turned back for the mother. The tiger thrashed in the freezing water, her golden eyes wide with fear. Without hesitation, Keanu dropped to his knees, extending his arms as far as they would go. "Come on, girl," he urged, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at him. "You can do this." The tiger let out a guttural roar, using every ounce of strength she had to claw her way onto the unbroken ice. Keanu grabbed her scruff, pulling her the rest of the way. She collapsed on the bank, her body shivering violently, but she was alive. Keanu sat beside her, his breath ragged, his hands trembling from the cold. He looked at the cub, who pressed itself against its mother, and then at the tiger, who turned her golden eyes to meet his. In that moment, there was no doubt in his mind they were a team now, bound together by survival and something deeper. "Let's keep going," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're not giving up." The low growl reverberated through the frigid night air, deep and guttural, sending a primal warning that made every hair on Keanu's neck stand on end. His eyes remained fixed on the darkness just beyond the firelight, his body tense but steady. From the shadows, a massive figure emerged, a snow leopard, its sleek body nearly invisible against the snowy backdrop, save for the faint shimmer of its spotted coat in the moonlight. Keanu didn't move. He understood the delicate balance of this moment. The predator wasn't here to attack out of malice. It was drawn by the scent of the tiger mother's blood, a natural instinct sharpened by the unforgiving wilderness. But that didn't make the situation any less dangerous. One wrong move could mean disaster for them all. The tiger cub whimpered again, pressing itself closer to its mother. The sound seemed to ignite a flicker of movement in the tiger mother's body, her ears twitching as she lifted her head weakly. Her golden eyes met the leopard's, and even in her weakened state, she let out a low, rumbling growl of defiance. The snow leopard hesitated, its powerful muscles coiled as if weighing its options. Keanu slowly shifted, stepping closer to the fire. He grabbed a thick branch, the tip still glowing with embers, and raised it in front of him. The leopard's yellow eyes flicked toward the flame. Narrowing slightly, Keanu took another step forward, holding his ground, his voice calm but commanding. "This isn't your fight," he said softly, as if the animal could understand him. "Go on. There's nothing for you here." The snow leopard snarled, but its gaze lingered on the fire, wary of the flickering flames. Keanu knew predators like this didn't back down easily, but they also didn't waste energy on unnecessary risks. He held the branch higher, the embers crackling, and took another step forward. The leopard growled once more, then finally turned, slinking back into the shadows with a reluctant grace. Keanu exhaled, his breath clouding in the cold air, and lowered the branch. The tiger mother's head dropped back to the ground, her body trembling from both exertion and exhaustion. Keanu crouched beside her, gently brushing snow from her fur. "You've still got fight in you," he murmured. The cub looked up at him with wide, trusting eyes, and Keanu felt a surge of resolve. They couldn't afford any more delays. As dawn broke over the forest, the soft light revealed the full expanse of the rugged terrain ahead. The sanctuary wasn't far now. Keanu estimated half a day's journey if they could keep moving steadily. He packed up their meager camp and helped the tiger mother rise to her feet. Her steps were slow, her injured leg dragging slightly, but there was determination in every movement. The cub darted around her, a small but constant source of encouragement. They pressed on, the morning air crisp but less biting than the night before. The forest began to thin, the trees giving way to open plains covered in a glittering blanket of snow. The open space offered no cover, leaving them vulnerable, but it also meant they were nearing the edges of the wilderness. Keanu's spirits lifted slightly, even as his eyes constantly scanned the horizon for any sign of danger. The journey was grueling, the tiger mother's strength waned, and Keanu found himself stopping more frequently to let her rest. At one point, she stumbled, her body collapsing into the snow. The cub let out a frantic cry, nudging her with its small head, but she didn't move. Keanu knelt beside her, his pulse quickening. Her breaths were shallow, her body trembling from sheer exhaustion. "You're not giving up now," Keanu said firmly, pulling his jacket off and draping it over her to provide some warmth. He rummaged through his pack, finding a protein bar, the last of his rations. He broke off small pieces, coaxing the tiger mother to eat. She hesitated but finally accepted the food, her golden eyes locking onto his as if understanding the depth of his determination. As she regained enough strength to rise, Keanu felt a faint vibration under his boots. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but then he heard it, a distant rumble. Growing louder, he turned sharply, his heart sinking as he realized what it was. Snowmobiles. The poachers were close. Keanu's mind raced. There was no way they could outrun them, not with the tiger mother injured and the cub so young. He glanced at the open plains ahead and spotted a dense thicket of trees in the distance, their dark forms standing like sentinels against the snow. It was their only chance. "Come on," he urged, his voice low but urgent. He helped the tiger mother to her feet, guiding her and the cub toward the thicket. The snowmobiles grew louder, the sound cutting through the cold air like a warning bell. Keanu pushed them forward, his own legs burning with effort, refusing to let fear take hold. They reached the edge of the thicket just as the first snowmobile crested a hill behind them. Keanu dove into the trees, pulling the tiger cub close as the mother staggered in after them. He crouched low, his heart pounding as he watched the poachers scan the open plains, their faces obscured by heavy goggles and scarves. they shouted to one another, the words lost in the roar of their engines. Keanu knew they wouldn't give up easily. Poachers like these were ruthless, and the sight of fresh tracks in the snow would only spur them on. He looked at the tiger mother, her body heaving with each labored breath, and at the cub, whose wide eyes mirrored the fear in his own. They had come too far to lose now. Silently, Keanu began to move deeper into the thicket, signaling for the tigers to follow. The dense trees provided some cover, but the tracks they left behind would eventually give them away. He needed a plan, something to buy them time. His eyes scanned the forest floor, searching for anything that could be used to slow their pursuers. The sound of the snowmobiles grew fainter as they moved deeper into the trees. But Keanu knew it wouldn't last. He tightened his grip on the branch he still carried, his mind working furiously. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for freedom. The forest began to thin, and through the snowy haze, Keanu caught a glimpse of the sanctuary's fencing in the distance. Relief surged through him, but he knew better than to celebrate just yet. The tiger mother's pace had slowed significantly, her injured leg dragging with every step, and the cub stayed close by her side. Sensing her struggle, Keanu paused, glancing back over his shoulder. The faint hum of engines was still there, echoing through the trees like a distant threat. The poachers hadn't given up, they were closing in. Not much farther now, Keanu murmured, trying to reassure himself as much as the tiger. He adjusted his pack and motioned for them to keep moving. We're going to make it. But just as they approached a clearing near the sanctuary's perimeter, a sharp crack rang out, a gunshot. The sound shattered the stillness, sending a jolt of fear through Keanu's body. He spun around, his heart pounding, and spotted movement among the trees behind them. Dark silhouettes emerged, their forms partially obscured by the swirling snow. The poachers had found them. Go! Keanu urged, waving the tiger mother and her cub forward. The tiger growled low, her golden eyes narrowing as she turned to face the threat. Keanu's pulse quickened. She wasn't running. She was preparing to fight. 3 men stepped into the clearing, rifles slung across their shoulders, their faces hidden behind scarves and goggles. One of them raised his weapon, pointing it directly at the tiger mother. That's our prize right there. The man snarled. Don't let her get away. Keanu moved instinctively, stepping between the men and the tigers. Leave them alone, he shouted, his voice firm despite the fear twisting in his chest. They're not yours to take. The poachers exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable behind their scarves. The leader barked a laugh. And who's going to stop us? You. He motioned to the others, and they began to spread out, trying to corner the animals. The tiger mother let out a thunderous roar, her body tensing despite her obvious exhaustion. Keanu could see the pain in her movements, the strain in her injured leg, but her determination burned brighter than ever. She stepped protectively in front of her cub, her posture daring the poachers to come closer. One of the men raised his rifle, aiming directly at the cub. Time seemed to slow as Keanu's heart dropped, but before the man could fire, the tiger mother sprang into action. With a powerful leap, she launched herself at the poacher, knocking him to the ground. The gun clattered out of his hands as he screamed, the sheer force of her attack leaving him stunned. The other 2 men shouted in alarm, scrambling to aim their weapons. Keanu didn't think. He acted, grabbing a large branch from the ground. He swung it with all his strength, striking one of the men in the arm and sending his rifle flying. The man cursed, clutching his arm as he staggered back. The 3rd poacher aimed at the tiger mother, but the cub let out a piercing cry, distracting him for a split second. That was all the mother needed. She turned on him with ferocity, her massive claws swiping through the air. The man stumbled, falling into the snow as the tiger roared above him. Her golden eyes blazed with an unrelenting fire, a force of nature driven by love and survival. Keanu's vision blurred as tears welled in his eyes. He had never seen anything like this, a mother's pure, unyielding instinct to protect her child, even at the cost of her own life. It was raw, powerful, and deeply human in its essence. His chest tightened as he watched her fight, every movement a testament to her strength and love. The poacher beneath her scrambled away, shouting to his companions, "Fall back! Fall back!" The men retreated into the trees, their confidence shattered by the tiger's fierce defense. The sound of their footsteps faded, leaving the clearing silent once more. The tiger mother stood over her cub, her body trembling with exhaustion. Blood matted her fur, but her golden eyes remained sharp, scanning the area for any remaining threats. When she was certain they were alone, she collapsed into the snow, her breathing heavy and labored. The cub nuzzled against her, letting out soft whimpers as it tried to comfort her. Keanu dropped to his knees beside them, his tears spilling freely now. "You're incredible," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You're the bravest soul I've ever seen." He reached out slowly, placing a hand on the tiger cub's back. The little one didn't flinch, instead pressing closer to him, as if sensing the safety he offered. Keanu looked down at the tiger mother, her gaze meeting his. In that moment, no words were needed. The bond between them was unspoken but profound, summoning every ounce of strength he had left. Keanu helped the tiger mother to her feet. She swayed but remained standing, her cub by her side. "We're almost there," he said softly. "Just a little further." Together, they moved toward the sanctuary, the fences now just a short distance away. Keanu could feel the weight of the journey in every step, but the image of the tiger mother standing tall, protecting her child, burned brightly in his mind. It was a moment he would never forget, a moment that would change him forever. The sanctuary gates creaked open as the staff rushed out, their boots crunching against the snow. They froze momentarily at the sight before them. An injured tiger mother, her cub trembling at her side, and a man whose clothes were torn and dusted with blood, his eyes heavy with exhaustion yet blazing with determination. "She's hurt, her leg's been through hell," Keanu said, his voice hoarse as he helped steady the tiger mother. "They need immediate care." The head ranger stepped forward, his weathered face etched with both astonishment and urgency. "We've been tracking poachers in the area for weeks, but we never expected this. Let's get them inside." He motioned to his team, who quickly brought a stretcher and guided the tiger mother through the gates. Keanu followed, his knees threatening to buckle beneath him, but he refused to rest until he knew they were safe. Inside, the sanctuary buzzed with activity. The staff worked with precision, cleaning the tiger mother's wounds and applying antibiotics to prevent infection. Her injured leg was carefully immobilized, and though she growled softly in discomfort, she didn't lash out. The cub stayed close, its wide blue eyes darting nervously around the room. Keanu stood nearby, his hand gripping the fence for support, watching intently. Every fiber of his being wanted to stay by their side. But his body finally gave out, and the world went black. Keanu woke to the sound of muffled voices and the faint hum of machinery. He blinked against the harsh light of the infirmary and realized he was lying on a cot, a blanket draped over him. The head ranger stood nearby, holding a steaming cup of coffee. "You gave us a scare," the ranger said, handing him the cup. "Thought you might need a bit of rest." Keanu sat up slowly, his muscles aching in protest. "What about them?" he asked immediately. "The tigers, are they okay?" The ranger nodded. "The cub is unharmed, and the mother's stable. She's tough, no doubt about it." But his voice trailed off, and his expression darkened. "We found tracks near the sanctuary perimeter. The poachers aren't far. If they've seen the tigers brought here, they'll come for them." Keanu's grip on the cup tightened. "Then we have to protect them." The ranger sighed, his eyes scanning Keanu's bruised and battered form. "You've already done more than enough. Rest. Let us handle this." But Keanu shook his head, his jaw set. "I've come this far. I'm not leaving now." The next day, the sanctuary prepared for what felt like an inevitable confrontation. The staff fortified the fences, setting up additional cameras and alarms. Keanu worked alongside them, his experience on movie sets lending itself surprisingly well to improvisation. He helped construct makeshift barricades, suggested diversion tactics, and even fashioned tripwires using materials from the supply shed. The tiger mother watched from her enclosure, her golden eyes following Keanu's every move. Her cub darted around her legs, playful and oblivious to the tension in the air. Keanu paused for a moment, leaning against the fence to catch his breath. "We're not going to let them take you," he said softly, his voice carrying a quiet determination. "Not after everything you've been through." That night, the sanctuary fell into an uneasy silence. The staff kept watch in shifts, their radios crackling with occasional updates. Keanu stayed awake, pacing near the enclosure. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. It wasn't just about the tigers. It was about standing up against the cruelty and greed that had brought them to this point. Around midnight, the alarms blared. The sharp sounds sliced through the quiet, and Keanu's heart leapt into his throat. He grabbed a flashlight and sprinted toward the outer fence, where several staff members had already gathered. "They're here," one of the rangers said, his voice low but urgent. Through the darkness, the faint glow of flashlights bobbed in the distance, accompanied by the crunch of boots on snow. Keanu squinted, counting at least 5 figures approaching the fence. The poachers had returned, and they were prepared. The poachers moved quickly, cutting through the outer perimeter with bolt cutters. Keanu and the staff held their ground, using the high ground of the sanctuary's observation deck to monitor their movements. As the poachers breached the inner fence, Keanu's carefully laid traps came into play. A tripwire sent one man sprawling into the snow, while another was momentarily blinded by a burst of powdered lime released from a hidden pouch. The chaos bought them time. But it wasn't enough. One poacher managed to reach the tiger enclosure, his rifle raised. Keanu felt a surge of adrenaline as he vaulted over the barricade, tackling the man to the ground. They grappled in the snow, the cold biting into Keanu's skin as he fought to disarm the poacher. A gunshot rang out, shattering the night. For a terrifying moment, Keanu thought he'd been hit, but the shot had gone wide. In the enclosure, the tiger mother roared, her voice echoing like thunder. The cub huddled behind her, trembling, as the remaining poachers circled the area. But the mother's strength was returning, and her instincts took over. She lunged at one of the intruders, her claws raking across his arm. He screamed, dropping his weapon and stumbling back. Keanu, still grappling with the other poacher, glanced toward the enclosure just in time to see the tiger mother standing tall, her body shielding her cub. Her defiance was unwavering, her golden eyes blazing with a fierce, maternal protectiveness. It was a sight that took his breath away. With the staff's help, the poachers were finally subdued, their weapons confiscated as the authorities were called. The men were led away in handcuffs, their faces twisted with frustration and defeat. The sanctuary was safe, for now. Keanu slumped against the fence, his body aching but his heart full. He looked at the tiger mother, who had returned to her cub's side. She lay down slowly, her body still trembling from the effort, but her cub nuzzled against her, safe and unharmed. Tears welled in Keanu's eyes as he watched them, a profound sense of relief washing over him. "You did it," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You protected your baby." The tiger mother's golden eyes met his, and in that moment, Keanu felt a connection deeper than words. It was a reminder of the power of love, the strength it gave even in the face of unimaginable odds. Dawn broke over the sanctuary, painting the snow-dusted landscape in hues of gold and pink. The chaos of the night had settled, leaving behind a quiet that felt almost surreal. Keanu stood near the tiger enclosure, his hands resting on the fence as he watched the mother and cub. They were sleeping now, their bodies curled together in the warmth of fresh straw. For the first time since he'd encountered them in the wilderness, they looked truly at peace. Behind him, the head ranger approached, his boots crunching softly against the snow. The authorities took the poachers into custody. "Looks like they were part of a larger ring," he said, his voice low. "Thanks to you, we've got enough evidence to shut them down." Keanu nodded, his gaze never leaving the tigers. "It wasn't just me," he said quietly. "She did most of the work." The ranger smiled, glancing at the sleeping pair. "She's remarkable. You don't see that kind of fight every day." He paused, his expression turning thoughtful. "And you didn't have to stay and fight. But you did." "Why?" Keanu let out a slow breath, his eyes softening. Because someone had to, he said. Because they deserve better than what this world has given them. And because I think they saved me as much as I saved them. The ranger nodded, understanding in his eyes. You've done something incredible here, Keanu. Not just for them, but for all of us. Over the next few days, the sanctuary became a place of healing. The tiger mother's leg began to heal under the care of the staff, and her strength slowly returned. The cub, once timid and afraid, grew more playful, often pouncing on the straw or chasing shadows in the enclosure. Keanu spent his days near them, watching from a respectful distance but always ready to lend a hand if needed. He found himself reflecting on everything that had brought him to this point. The exhaustion he'd felt before his journey, the sense of detachment from the world, it all seemed distant now, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. The bond he'd formed with the tigers was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. It was pure, unspoken, and transformative. One evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, the ranger approached Keanu with news. Her recovery is going better than we hoped, he said. We think she's ready to return to the wild. Keanu's chest tightened. He knew this moment was coming, but it didn't make it any easier. And the cub? He asked. They'll go together, the ranger replied. She's strong enough to care for him now. They'll have a chance to thrive out there. The release was set for the following morning. The staff gathered at the edge of the sanctuary's protected forest, their voices hushed as they prepared to open the gates. Keanu stood near the front, his hands tucked into his coat pockets. The tiger mother paced the edge of the enclosure, her movement steady but purposeful. The cub followed closely, its bright blue eyes darting curiously around the unfamiliar surroundings. When the gates finally opened, there was a moment of stillness. The tiger mother stepped forward, her golden eyes scanning the forest ahead. Then, with a low rumble, she moved gracefully through the opening, her cub trotting eagerly behind her. The crowd watched in silence as they disappeared into the trees, their white coats blending seamlessly with the snowy backdrop. Keanu felt a lump rise in his throat as he watched them go. He knew this was what was best for them, that they belonged to the wild, free and untethered. But it didn't make the goodbye any less bittersweet. The ranger placed a hand on Keanu's shoulder. You gave them a chance, he said. That's more than most would have done. Keanu nodded, his eyes still fixed on the forest. They gave me something, too, he said softly. They reminded me of what matters. As the weeks passed, life at the sanctuary returned to its usual rhythm. Keanu stayed on for a while, helping with other animals and sharing his story with visitors. The experience had changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. He felt a renewed connection to the world around him, a sense of belonging that had eluded him for years. Before leaving the sanctuary, Keanu visited the edge of the forest one last time. He stood in the quiet, letting the sounds of nature wash over him. For a moment, he thought he saw movement in the trees, a flash of white against the green. It was fleeting, but it brought a smile to his face. You're out there, he murmured, and you're free. The story of the tiger mother and her cub became a symbol of hope and resilience, inspiring countless people around the world. It reminded them of the profound connection between humans and nature, and the responsibility we all share to protect it. As for Keanu, he returned to his life, but he was no longer the same. The bond he'd formed with the tigers stayed with him, a constant reminder of the strength found in love, the courage born from compassion, and the unbreakable connection between all living beings. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey with Keanu Reeves and the majestic white tiger family. If you enjoyed the story and found it as touching as we did, comment number 2 below to let us know. If the story wasn't to your liking, that's okay too. Comment number 7 and share your thoughts. We'd love to hear your perspective. It's important to remember that this is a fictional story, created to inspire and spread awareness. Through Keanu's courage, the tiger mother's fierce love for her cub, and the incredible resilience of these animals, we aim to highlight some powerful truths: the importance of kindness to all living beings, the sacred bond of motherhood, and our shared responsibility to protect the wildlife that makes this planet so extraordinary. If this message resonates with you, we'd be honored to have you join our community. Subscribe to Tapestry of Worlds, where we share more stories that celebrate the beauty of humanity, nature, and the incredible connections that bind us all. Let's continue weaving these tales together, one story at a time.